Two Continents restaurant in the Washington Hotel. By the way, I've been doing this curve forever, but that day we had Jerry Ford's 5% tax surcharge, and the government was estimating 5% increase in revenues. And I said, look, with the tax surcharge of 5%, you may get more revenues, but you're not going to get 5% more. You may get 4%, 3%, 2% more, or you may even lose revenues, but you will not get 5%. I don't understand it, and I just took out the napkin and I drew the curve on that napkin showing the two effects that tax rates have on revenues. Obviously, the first one is if you raise tax rates, you do collect more revenue per dollar of tax base, but if you raise tax rates, you shrink the tax base. And these two effects always work in the opposite direction. And Lord Almighty, Jude Winniski wrote for the Wall Street Journal and wrote a big piece called Taxes, Revenues, and the Laffer Curve. And my life was never the same.
Okay, so the premise being that if you charge zero taxes or you charge 100% in taxes, the economy doesn't work, right?
Well, you get no revenues.
Right, because you either charge.
Obviously.
Right.
Who's gonna work if every time you go to the office, instead of getting a check, you have to pay a bill?
At 100%, right.
Yeah, or higher. Yeah, I mean, it makes no sense. No one will work for nothing forever.
And you have to have some taxes, or you would never have any revenue if zero.
You need some taxes. So if you take that 100% and start lowering tax rates, sooner or later you're going to start increasing revenues. And if you take that 0% tax rate and start raising tax rates, you're going to get more revenues. And they sort of meet at a point somewhere in the middle range where you get the two differences. And sometimes when you raise tax rates, you collect more revenues. That's true. And sometimes when you raise tax rates, you collect less revenues. It depends on where you are. And I think the U.S. is way in the range where if you raise tax rates, you're going to collect less revenues. And if we lower tax rates, we're going to collect more revenues. I believe that with regard to the president's tax proposal.
Which is now President Trump proposed cutting taxes drastically for businesses and all sorts of other taxes. And the argument is that he will blow a hole in the deficit. You say.
That's what they say.
They say that. You, world-class economist Arthur Laffer, say what?
That's silly that it'll blow a hole in there. What you know is several things are in operation here. Number one, there are lots of companies today that don't pay any taxes because they have all sorts of lawyers, accountants, favor grabbers, lobbyists sheltering their income. If they shelter their income at 35% so they pay no taxes, God knows at 15% they won't pay any less taxes. In fact, they probably will find it not worthwhile to shelter their income. The U.S. today has the highest corporate tax rate in the OECD, the highest, and the sixth lowest revenues. Goodness knows that if we cut tax rates, we can't get less revenues there. And another one I just want to touch on with you is it's not just corporate tax revenues we're talking about. We're talking about total taxes. And if you lower tax rates, you're going to have more investment, more output, more employment. You'll have more income, more sales, more property values, and all of those will get payroll taxes, we'll get income taxes, we'll get sales taxes, we'll get property taxes, we'll get all of these other taxes, which will clearly reduce that hole that you talk about, and in fact, I believe will lead to a very sharp increase in tax revenues. If we just went to the average of the OECD, our tax revenues would increase dramatically as a share of GDP.
Because we, consumers, would have more money to spend, would spend more, creating more tax revenue.
That's part of it. It's also that companies will stop sheltering their income. You know, tax shelters and all this stuff, which at 35% make a lot more sense than at 15%, so therefore they fire their lawyers, accountants, deferred income specialists, their lobbyists, and they pay their damn taxes like they should. I mean, that's what it should happen. And likewise, at a 35% tax rate, a company is going to try to spend 35% of its resources trying to reduce its tax rate and 65% of its resources trying to do good business. If you drop that tax rate down to 15%, they're going to spend a lot less effort on taxes and a lot more effort in creating good products, productivity increases, and all that. Just compare. I mean, forgive me for this, but just compare the post office and the Department of Motor Vehicles with Microsoft, with Google, with Amazon. Which ones do you think have more productivity, more growth, more sensitivity? Obviously, when you have high tax rates and people aren't incentivized, they're going to slack off and they're not going to produce as much. And that's so true, especially with regard to government enterprises. So all of these just multiply together to make – there's no way we're not going to get the budget in balance better with cutting tax rates. And, you know, if you look at it over 5 or 10 years, it'll be huge. How does Bernie Sanders say that? Huge.
Okay, so but your premise is that there's a sweet spot, right? There's a tax rate that is like Goldilocks, not too high, not too low, but just right.
Yes. That's exactly correct. You can undertax an economy and not get the public services you need, or you can overtax it and destroy the production base. You need to be very careful, and it depends on lots of things. Now, when we cut the corporate tax rate in 1986 to 7 from 46% to 34%, that was in Reagan's 86 Tax Act, we moved from being one of the highest tax rates in the OECD to being one of the lowest. In that year, and it really worked wonders. We had a great boom. But then all these other countries copied us. And now we're the highest tax rate again in the OECD. It's time for us to become competitive and get that tax rate down and bring all those inversions back to the U.S. and bring all those foreign production and jobs and output back to the U.S. And that's exactly what Trump has proposed. That's exactly why he's proposed it. And that's why I think it's absolutely spectacular.
Arthur Laffer, a couple more questions with you, and we thank you for your time.
I'm here for it. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned Ronald Reagan, right? Legendary tax cuts. Then the opposite argument is he had to raise a couple taxes. The debt exploded. George W. Bush cut taxes. The deficit exploded. You also worked with Sam Brownback, governor of Kansas, which cut taxes, and they're now running a deficit. So the other side would say, what you're saying, when put into practice, doesn't work.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think it worked very well with Reagan. Now, it is true that debt rose during the Reagan era. In fact, it even rose relative to GDP. That's true. But debt relative to the wealth of the country fell dramatically. Now, when you buy a house, is the only thing you look at when you look at the mortgage that you're going to have to get is your income, or do you look at the value of the house in addition?
You look at everything.
Yeah, you look at everything. What you want to do is compare debt to wealth, and you want to compare debt service to income. If you look at debt to wealth under Reagan, it went through the ceiling. It went through the ceiling under Clinton too. And by the way, the debt shrank under Clinton, which was the ultimate period of our tax cuts. I mean, Clinton was a great president. He cut spending. He cut taxes a lot. He was really terrific. And I voted for him twice, just so you know. And that was the ultimate of the Reagan. It takes some time for these things to occur, but don't worry, they do occur.
Back up a second. I want to make sure people understand that. You voted for Bill Clinton not once, but twice?
Yeah. How could you vote for Bob Dole, who just promised to raise taxes, and every time he saw a tax, he wanted to have babies with it? I mean, what a silly thing. It's not Republican. It's not Democrat. It's not liberal. It's not conservative. It's not left-wing or right-wing. It's economics. And if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, do I need to say the next sentence to you? Come on, it's just played straight. And I spent a lot of time with your former governor, Jay Nixon, and
yes.
tried to explain it. And he just had a couple of years left. And he said, "All right, I just can't take a risk on it." And you saw what happened to him. I mean, you see what's happening to Missouri. You guys need tax cuts and pro-growth badly. And you see what happened. I mean, you mentioned Sam Brownback, but he did a very little bitty tiny tax, and you had all this problem with oil and farm products, which really killed him. But when you look at Missouri, you guys are on the tailpipe of the nation because of your tax policy. You're driving everyone out of your state. Now, finally, you got rid of forced union. You got right to work, thank God, but you need a lot more than that. Believe me when I tell you. If you look at my state, Tennessee, we have the lowest tax burden of any state in the nation, the fastest growth rate, the best budget. We have $2 billion surplus. We have our pension funds fully funded. We're AAA rated, the only state, the number one state in the nation. We have the best improvement in public services ever, in schools especially, but also in highways and everything else. And we're attracting people like mad into Tennessee. And believe me, it's not for the palm trees and the beaches.
And so what's the tax rate in Tennessee?
0.
You don't have a personal income tax?
No, we do not. And guess what? Tennesseans know that, and so do Missourians. And guess what happens to people in Missouri who want to keep some of their income? They move to Tennessee. And that's why we have the 8th highest in-migration, and those in-migrants bring their money with them.
It's
just common sense.
What's your sales tax in Tennessee?
We have a very high sales tax, but we have one of the lowest property taxes in the nation, and our overall tax burden is the lowest in the nation. And our overall employment growth is the highest in the nation. Duh. I mean, it's the Laffer curve all the way.
That's Laffer. So,
some people spell it the other way.
That is right. All right. So, last question for you, Dr. Arthur Laffer.
Any question you got, I'm ready for.
So, look into your crystal ball, and what happens with this Trump tax cut? Does it get changed? Do the Republicans stand up and do what they said they're going to do? What's going to happen in the future here?
I don't think the Republicans have any legs. They don't stand up for damn anything, do they? They really don't. I mean, it's embarrassing seeing how every one of them voted 100% for repealing Obamacare, and then look at what's happened.
Yes.
I mean, is it not just embarrassing? I mean, why they wouldn't just repeal Obamacare 3 years from now? In other words, we have a 3-year window to correct the program. But we have an automatic drop-dead date 3 years from now when Obamacare disappears. That's the right way to do it. But no, they got to do the one repeal and replace at the same time, which is silly.
Another question for you, because there's.
What I'm saying is, I don't think.
Yeah.
I think the Republicans are what Arnold Schwarzenegger. I shouldn't do this. This is Schwarzenegger. You say, "Girly man," and I don't mean that. The strongest supporters are ladies in Congress, not the
certainly
men.
Understand. I will burn the tape after this. Okay, so
yes,
fair enough.
Please do.
All right. So President Obama, in his stimulus package, 1/3 of it was targeted tax cuts. Are you a fan of targeted tax cuts or flat?
No, if not, and his was not tax rate cuts. In fact, he had tax rate increases all throughout his plan. But he had targeted tax cuts, and you saw how that worked out for you, didn't you?
Well, it depends on which business you were in. Some were good, some were bad.
Well, yeah, in the businesses of undertakers, they did really well in tax shelters, hedges, and all sorts of other people. But frankly, the economy is in the worst shape it's been in 67 years if you look at real GDP per adult detrended, which is the right way to look at it. Obama and W were catastrophes. I mean, please help me on this. How have you ever heard of a poor person spending himself into wealth?
No.
Is that not stupid? Have you ever heard of an economy being taxed into prosperity?
No, I haven't heard that.
No. The only way you can balance the budget in the U.S. is by having economic growth. You cannot balance the budgets on the backs of the unemployed, underemployed, and those people who leave the labor force. You just can't do it. You need growth to balance the budget, and that's exactly the way it's always been done. And that's growth is always achieved as it was under Kennedy, as it was under Reagan, as it was under all of these Harding and Coolidge. It's achieved by making work and production more profitable. And that's by lowering tax rates and lowering regulations and having sound money and free trade.
Well, I would love to have dinner with you, and you can write on the napkins, and I'll even let you pick up the check, Doctor.
Oh, did you read the Doonesbury cartoon about me on that?
No, I did not.
Well, the Doonesbury one says, and I was at the dinner. Oh, you were there at the dinner? Oh, yeah, I was at the dinner. I sat at the table next to him. I could hear something really was big going on. Laffer was explaining all these things, and then he stuck him with a bill and left. It was one of the cute little cartoons. I've got it on my wall.
World-class economist Arthur Laffer, the inventor of the Laffer curve, who was made famous all these years ago. Doctor, thank you very much for your time. You're welcome here anytime.
Well, and also, I'll take you up on dinner.
It would be an honor. Thank you, sir.
For me, too. Thank you.
All right. Arthur Laffer, ladies and gentlemen. That's the man everyone talks about when you hear about the Laffer curve. There he is. He didn't seem like a devil. He seemed like a very nice man, right? People portray him as, right,